You are now watching a clip from the Inspired by show. You can watch the full episode on our YouTube channel or listen on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So make sure to head over there, leave us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed it, and follow the show. Obviously, we've spoken about your story before, and I've seen you on stage, and we've written in books together, which we'll talk about later. A lot of it you credit to the foundations of your personal life first.
Yes.
And then your professional life second, like you just mentioned. Now, if I may, I'd love to talk a little bit more about your experience as a parent going through your daughter having challenges with anxiety and panic attacks, because from many of our listeners know and our viewers know, my background all started because I had mental illnesses. I was struggling with depression and anxiety. Had depression first. When I fixed that, the anxiety kicked in because I was paranoid about it coming back. So... And I've always found it interesting to see it from the parent's perspective, because I know my mum struggled not being able to fully help because she wanted to help so much.
Yeah.
And funny enough, I went back home in the same regard. So what was your experience like with that, with Holly, and how did you feel you were able to support her through that?
Again, so many layers. The first, I think the most important thing was So I'll just do a little bit of context first. So whenever I met Gary, there was already 3 children, of which Holly is one, in the equation. So I inherited an 11, 12 and 14-year-old.
Wow.
And Holly's the youngest of those 3. And this is quite some time later when the kids had already moved out, when they were living with us. So we were very much a family unit. And so my relationship, I really consciously chose what kind of relationship do I have and what place do I have, because I'm not their mother, and I didn't want to try and replace their mother because the mother is still alive and absolutely will always be in that place in the family. And this is something that, I'm very present to because of the way in which I work. I do a lot of what I call systemic work, so going quite deep and into the family system, because it plays through in everything that we do. Yeah. And so I was really attuned to being very careful around how I set myself up in terms of the relationship. So that context is quite important to answer your question then around how could I be available for Holly from my place. And the way I would describe our relationship is like a much older sister or like an aunt. So that's the kind of relationship. And we have a beautiful relationship. I'm very fortunate.
Wow.
Because 11 and 12 and 14-year-olds can be interesting.
Yeah.
So with that backdrop in mind, when Holly reached out and, declared where she was at, as is always the case with my husband, Gary, and I, we will have a really deep conversation, the two of us, as to, what do we feel is the right thing to do? And we get really aligned before we would then share it with the children. And bearing in mind, she's an adult at this stage, but we still call them the children. Yeah. And so I said to Gary, well, from my point of view, fundamentally, we need to open the house and invite her home. She might not want to take the offer, and then we'll have to think about how we can support her differently. But yeah, it was a very easy, yes, please, come back to the bosom of the family space. So that she could feel safe and she could have us around her. And then, of course, I talked about putting in, a rhythm to the day. Beyond that kind of structure that was intentionally trying to put some positivity in. And I don't know if you ever saw any of the Joe Wicks workouts, but Joe Wicks had this thing where he was doing every other day, he would kind of be having a quiz built into the workout where you had to think about what's the capital of Kazakhstan and, all of these weird and random. And so we would always have a bit of a laugh as well as we were doing this workout, and a bit hot and sweaty and swearing as part of the process. So I thought, right, let's get that in. And then we we have breakfast together, then we come together for lunch, and then we have dinner together. So just trying to kind of put some order in that felt it got some continuity and security to it, with lots of spaces. And we're very lucky we've got a really large garden, so they could go outside in the space in between. But beyond that, more from an emotional standpoint then, it was, just sitting down with Holly and making sure that she knew she could speak to us, she could kind of lay out where she was at. And she did have a couple of panic attacks while she was with us. And the very literal thing is I just hugged her and I just got her to breathe. And we literally breathed together through it to kind of get her whole nervous system back into regulation. I couldn't speak about it from a physician point of view, But from a human who could see somebody who was struggling to breathe, I really just held her and let her know that we were here and bring her back to get her feet on the ground, to talk about, it's okay, we're here, nothing's going to happen, you're safe. You know, though the things that your body needs to hear to calm everything down again. And so there was a series of those that happened over the time. And what was going to be a 3-week stint turned it into like almost a year. So, you know, that consistency and security of knowing she could come home and be fed, to be looked after. I think at every point in our life, we are the child. And it's knowing that there's going to be somebody there for you to put your arm around you and give you a hug or tell them that you love them or feel like you're cared for genuinely. Yeah. You know, she was the youngest of the 3 children when her parents split. And so she was always going to be the one that potentially was the most vulnerable because she was she was only 8.
Wow.
When her parents went separate ways. So we always knew that if anything showed up, it would probably show up through Holly. And so, you know, we're very mindful of that, not just then, but also today.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And she's so fortunate to have someone like yourself for Gary, and also that she had